Good morning. How we doing today? Hey, I like the excitement. Man, I was feeling great, and I'm walking up here, and I hiked the Grand Canyon on Friday, okay? My father-in-law talked me into it, and I said last year I'd never do it again. A year later, I did it again. And so I'm doing good. My calves are feeling okay, and then I saw this step, and my calves just clenched up a little bit, and they're like, "You're not doing this to me again." And I almost just fell over. So if I collapse mid-sermon, you just know why. Just be prepared. And Victor, you can catch me right there. But anyway, we are so excited that you are here. We have 2 weeks left of the series, Together is Better. And man, this has been a great time where we've talked about the value of why we come together as a church. And as we've gone through this series, we've looked at different aspects of our church. And as we kind of boil down to the end, we have another really relevant topic that I think we need to dissect today. You see, in 2020, there's a lot of words that can describe this year. Words like fear, like chaos, like the end, or apocalypse, or maybe straight just terrible. Most people aren't putting on their Facebook like, 2020, it's been a great year for me, it's the best year of my life. Like, it's not working right now, right? Like, there's a lot of crazy things that have happened this year. But maybe the word that sums us up the best in this moment in time, with a couple months left before the end, is division. And today we're going to talk about how divided our world is and what the counter to that is. Because when we talk about politics or movements or religion or even God's people, there is division that is wrought throughout it. But you see, this isn't something new. Actually, Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 1, verse 10, we see that the church has actually been dealing with division for thousands of years. He says this, he says, "Now I urge you, brothers and sisters, in the name of our Lord Jesus Christ, that all of you agree in what you say, that there be no divisions among you, and that you be united with the same understanding and the same contribution." You see, division has been happening for a long time. And even in the honeymoon stage, the early church has Jesus kind of commissioned this movement, and churches are starting left and right. They already ran into some division amongst themselves. The other day, or a couple weeks ago in our Bible group, one of the couples said, "We never started fighting until we had kids," right? Like, usually in the honeymoon stage, you don't fight. It's different. Then you have kids, and like I say, they're a little jerks sometimes. And then all of a sudden, you're like, why aren't we getting along as better? But the church here started having these issues. But today, I actually want to turn to a different church that Paul also writes to. Because our church, I don't think at this time has these issues wrought throughout it. And I've heard stories of churches being divided over things that are just ridiculous, like carpet color. And we don't have those discussions and those arguments here. You're like, we got whatever carpet we have. But we're going to turn our attention to the book of Philippians. And in Philippians chapter 2, Paul talks to a healthy church, a great church, a church that was on mission and reaching their community and telling people about Jesus, but he warns them of what can come if they're not careful. So if you have your Bible or your app, you can go ahead and flip to Philippians chapter 2 or grab the Bible in the chair in front of you. And we're going to spend some time dissecting this today. But as you're flipping there or you're pulling up the notes on your phone, let me tell you why this idea of unity is so important. Because today, as we say that we want to be unified as a church, you're like, well, together in unity or united kind of sound like the same thing. Well, you see, I think united is kind of the next step from being together. The other day, I was getting my car fixed. And I was sitting in there, and my car is close to 100,000 miles. I was like, man, I got to take this in. And they're giving me the list of all the things that needs to be done. And I want to cry. And I'm like, all right, do these things. We'll just roll the dice on the other ones. And finally, my car gets finished. I go up front. I'm paying, and they're pulling it around. And I'm sitting in the little lobby. And I had an AirPod in, and I turned it off in order, but it's still in my ear so that they don't know if I'm listening. I'm kind of hovering off to the corner. And I look around, and there's about 5 of us in this small room. And we're all gathered together in this room. But then they start having a conversation. And a couple employees with a customer, I think they start talking. And they start diving into their lives. They start talking about how they've had relationships that haven't worked. They talk about how they've been scarred and how they're like, I'm never getting married again. It's terrible. It's horrible. It's awful. And I'm like, I'm getting a little depressed right now. And then they're like, and I don't even want to trust anyone again. I just want to be on my own for the rest of my life. It's better that way. And I'm getting more depressed. And then they were going deeper and deeper. And I thought about this for a second. They're united in a different way than I am. They're united in something that's bigger, a deeper pain that they have, a worldview that they're adopting that I'm going to swear off love forever, which, man, please don't be united in that worldview. But you see, today I want to talk about how we can be united to something greater. That we not merely be together, gathered in a room, sitting, checking our clock and football scores. Hopefully you have the Cardinals game DVR'd. Don't tell me the score. But that we're not just together here in a room, but that we be united as a people for something bigger. So let me give you a key thought as we jump into this in a second. Actually, I'm going to read the verse and then I'll give you a key thought. Let's start at Philippians chapter 2, starting in verse 1. Here's what it says. That Paul is writing to this church at Philippi, and he says this, if then there is any encouragement in Christ, if any consolation of love, any fellowship with the Spirit, if any affection and mercy, here's what he says to do. Make my joy complete. Paul here is saying that if you are a Jesus follower, that's what he kind of says in these words, meaning that if Christ encouraged you, if love comforts you, if you feel the Holy Spirit directing your walk, all those things are the marks or are done if you are a follower of Jesus. So he's like, if you are a Christian, if you follow Jesus, then he says, make my joy complete. Well, how does the church make Paul's joy complete? Well, we're going to kind of talk about this in a second, but it's by being united together. I was reflecting on this past week, and I'm a parent of 2 young kids, 2 and 4. And if you're a parent out there, you can hopefully agree with this, that nothing is more special than when your kids get along. Like after nap time and quiet time, my 4-year-old daughter will go, she'll get fruit snacks out for her and Archie, my son, and then she'll give them to me, we'll open them, and they sit on the couch and they're nice. And sometimes I just stop and I stand and I'm like, this is so sweet. I'm like, you guys love each other. She's like, here you go, Archie. He's like, thank you, Aria. And I'm like, this is so adorable. And then I turn my head for a second and they're like, I'm out of fruit snacks. Can I have one of yours? They're like, no. And they punch each other in the face and then they start fighting. And I'm like, I'm a terrible parent. What am I doing? And you just think, but then they get cute again and you're like, man, this is awesome. And Paul here has experienced something similar. He's like, it's beautiful as a pastor or as a parent when the members, when the kids get along. And Paul here is saying, make my joy complete by being united in something different. So let me drop a key thought on you this morning, that an effective church is a united church. That an effective church is a united church. We are on the same page. I sat and watched too much college football yesterday. But what I love about college football is when there's a play that works to perfection, everyone's running their route, everyone's doing, and then it works to completion. And you see, there's no different with the church. When we're all focused on the right things, when we're all moving the right direction, it just works so great. So here's the question that we're going to spend the rest of our time diving into Philippians 2 and answering this morning is, how do we as a church and as a people of God stay united? You see, because too often we can put this out here. We can say this is what an effective church looks like. This is how we can make Jesus known in our community. This is how we can tell people the gospel. But too often churches fall apart. I grew up in Arizona, and one of the things my dad passed on to me was being a staunch sports fan of all Arizona teams. I got one person that agrees with that. It's because you're like, I'm not from Arizona, I don't care. I'm wearing a Dodgers shirt. That's heresy right now. I'm just kidding, I love you, Mike. But as growing up a sports fan, in 2004, the Phoenix Suns did something amazing. They signed Steve Nash. And they drafted him. He went to the Mavericks for a while, but he came back. And in that year, they went 62-20, first seed in the NBA. And they went to the Western Conference Finals. They would have won the championship if Joe Johnson didn't bash his face on the floor. Not like I'm bitter. But they had an incredible run. But here's what happens. And they would go on to kind of start an era of basketball. But this team of Steve Nash, Joe Johnson, Sean Marion, Quentin Richardson, and Amari Stoudemire, they were the start of something great. But the offseason before, our cheap owner decided not to sign Joe Johnson. And he walked. And that team of what could have been couldn't quite stay together. And the rest is history, or no championship in that history. And you see, the church can be sometimes the same way. That we can get distracted. We cannot keep the core. We cannot keep on the same mission. So today, as we dive into Philippians chapter 2, we're going to see how Paul tells us, don't get distracted. Don't go off in the right way. And let's stay united in doing the work of God. And it starts by pursuing the same mentality. Let's keep reading in chapter 2, verse 2. Here's what Paul says to the church at Philippi. He tells them to make my joy complete. How do we do this? Well, he says by thinking the same way, having the same love, united in spirit, intent on one purpose. You see, Paul writes this in a way that the answer to making his joy complete is done in 3 steps. And he's going to make these 3 steps in these next 3 verses. But the first one happens here in verse 2, where he tells them to think the same, to have the same mentality. Now, if you are on social media in any way, or if you just talk to people, outside in the world, you will realize very quickly it is not easy to have the same thought, right? To find a group of people who all think the same way. Just go read a little bit of Twitter and you'll be depressed for the rest of the day. And even secular leaders acknowledge this. Mark Manson recently said on Twitter that it's entirely possible that giving people more information and access to a wider diversity of ideas does not moderate beliefs or bring people together. Rather, it fragments them and drives them further apart. I've said this before, but I believe we live in such a content-heavy age that there is so much thrown at us. And there's so much that can make us angry, that can get us emotional, that gets us riled up. And too often, with all this information at our access, without the wisdom discerned through it, it leads to further divisions, further arguments, further saying, you're wrong, and I'm going to find the people that agree with me, rather than finding unity and commonality and grace and bringing people together. And Paul here addresses this, and he doesn't say simply think the same, but he says what the rest of the verse lays out of. He says how to do this. First, the same mentality, as one commentator puts it, is the same outlook. You see 3 ideas here combined to emphasize its different aspect. It says to have the same love as Christ did, to have the same harmonious affection, and to value the same thing. This is what he says in verse 2, where he says the same love, united in spirit, and intent on one purpose. And you see, when you combine these things and speak of unity, you find that it moves things in the right direction. Here's what I mean by that. First, Paul tells us that he says having the same love. And when he says have the same love, the model that this points to is the love of Christ. Ephesians chapter 5, verse 2 tells us to walk in love. But it says that walk in love as Christ also loved us and gave himself up for us, a sacrificial and fragrant offering. You see, when Jesus was here on earth, he loved in a way that was sacrificial. He loved in a way that was selfless. And too often, just like our story when I'm listening in getting my car fixed, we love in a way that expects something in return. We'll say like, I'll love you if you love me back. I'll love you if this relationship is good. But as soon as things get bad, as soon as things get rocky, man, I'm out. As soon as I'm not getting something in return for my love, this just isn't what I signed up for. And our world has this idea of we're going to love as long as it's conditional, as long as it's good. But Christ loved unconditionally. Christ loved sacrificially. Christ loved even when there was no expectation that we would love him back. But he says not only do we love like Christ loved us, but we also must be united in spirit. The Greek word here translates as harmonious. Now, anyone here good at singing a harmony? No one raised their hand. I was going to recruit for Josh right now. I was like, you're signed up. But a little bit fact about my background and my childhood in high school, and you might make fun of me, it's just I was in choir, right? Did for 3 years. We were called Bel Canto. Yeah. I think we got to go to Disneyland and compete one time. I'm pretty sure I did it so me and my friend could pick up girls. And we weren't successful. But so we sang in choir, and I was never good at harmonizing. Like, I was good at singing a melody, and melody is kind of the baseline of the song. But harmony, you don't sing the same note, but you complement the melody. But here's the deal. Even though you don't sing the note, if the melody goes up, the harmony has to go up too. And if the harmony doesn't move at the same as the melody, then you get this like, and it sounds ugly, like I'm trying to sing harmony or something. And the part that Paul here is talking about when he says to be harmonious with the Spirit and with one another, it's saying that maybe you're not going to be exactly the same as the people around you, but it's moving in lockstep with them. You see, unity and harmony aren't about conformity, aren't about being the same person, but about moving in the same direction in lockstep with one another. And Paul is encouraging the believers here that not only do you have to have the same love, but you also have to complement one another. You have to work with one another in harmony to accomplish God's mission, which leads to this last part of the same mentality, is to be intent on one purpose. Man, this is nothing new, and this is something that is repetitive, and we say all the time. And you're like, man, Scott's already said it. You say it every single week, Pastor Andrew. Like, can't you get some new words? But we say all the time, our mission, our purpose here at Cross Church is to make Jesus known. And Paul was telling him the same thing, that you need to be united in something greater. You need to have the same love. You need to complement one another. But more than anything, you need to be guided and have the same mentality of we're going to spread the gospel and tell people about Jesus. You see, that's what having and pursuing the same mentality that Paul talks about. But he doesn't stop there. In order to stay united, we also need to be pursuing the life of humility. Let's keep reading in verse 3. Paul goes on and he says, do nothing out of selfish ambition. He says, or conceit, but in humility, consider others as more important than yourself. A little interesting context with this verse. The word that Paul uses here in the original language of Greek for humility was not something that was favorable in this time. This was actually a word that they would use to describe a servant or a slave's mentality. So Paul was saying in humility, and when they would read that, they're like, no, I don't want that. It's kind of like you might hear today, like if you have a poverty mindset, you're like stuck in the cycle and can't get out of it. And Paul is, when he'd say this, the secular culture would cringe a little bit. They're like, why would we want to be humble? Why would we want to have a poor mentality? And what here, Paul is trying to flip it on its head and says, no, I'm pointing to Christ in his humility. That is something so different than what your world says. I'm actually really excited about this because in 2 weeks we're starting a new series called Holiday on Its Head. And we're going to be studying through the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus does exactly this. He takes their beliefs of their society and of their religion and he flips it upside down. He's like, you think this? No, this is the way of God. And in here, Paul is doing the same thing. He's like, you have this Christ-like humility. You think humility is a bad thing, but let me show you how it's something great. And actually, as he dives into this, Paul kind of keeps going. And I think today it has very applicable features for us today because I think Christ-like humility is still a foreign concept to us. If you Google humility, which my 2 favorite sources for doing a sermon is the Bible, then Google. That's how I go. But if you Google humility, the first definition that comes up is a modest or a low view of one's own importance. Now, when you hear that, you think, well, yeah, that doesn't sound great. And you think of Christ-like humility, and then you try to reconcile that with Jesus said at one point in his ministry, that I am the way, the truth, and the life, and no one comes to the Father except through me. Jesus just say, I am the only way to God. That doesn't sound like he has a low importance of himself, right? He's saying, I am the one way you can get to God, that you can have eternal life. Instead, I think we need to rethink humility here. You see, humility isn't having a low view of your personal importance, but it's having a high view of others' importance. C.S. Lewis says it this way, That he says, don't imagine if that you meet a really humble man, he will be what most people call humble nowadays. He will not be some sort of greasy, swarmy person who is always telling you that, of course, he is a nobody. We hear that, right? Like, we think humility is saying, nah, I'm no one, I'm not important, don't talk to me, it's whatever. But this is how he continues. He says, probably all you will think about him is that he seemed a cheerful, intelligent chap. All right, he's from a little bit ago. We should bring chap back, that's a nice word. But he's saying a really intelligent dude, we'll say that, who took a real interest in what you said to him. If you do dislike him, it will be because you feel a little envious of anyone who seems to enjoy life so easily. He will not be thinking about humility. He will not be thinking of himself at all. You see, this is where we got to challenge ourselves. Do we have a mindset, a life of humility? Do we think of others before we think of ourselves? And I have to struggle with that. And here's some questions if you're like, I don't know if I'm a humble guy. I don't know if I really care about others, or if I look for them and I see the value in them. I'm kind of focused on myself and getting my own life right and getting through my day. And maybe you're like, I don't know if I'm humble. Well, ask some questions to yourself. Say, am I competing for people's attention or for their approval? Do I find it difficult to rejoice in the success of others? Man, I'll be candid with you. When we first started our church, and the first few years were super rocky. Like, we just did not know what we were doing. And then I would go talk to my other pastor friends, and sometimes I would want them to say that, they're struggling too, so we could feel better, and we could cry on each other's shoulders. And they're like, man, everything's awesome. And I'm like, cool, bro. Yeah, me too. 5 people just left last week, whatever. Some dude said, you're a heretic or whatever. I don't know. And I was like, I had to rewire my mindset of no, man, it's about the kingdom. It's about something bigger than me. It's not about our success here at Cross Church, but it's about greater success out of there. And sometimes we get in our personal lives wrapped up in that, is we can't celebrate someone else's success because our success isn't where we want to be. So sometimes we try to tear them down to make us feel better, but instead we don't need to do either of those things. We need to have a high view of ourselves and our importance and the value God has placed us on, but have an equally high importance of others. Are we pursuing a life of humility? But lastly, we stay united by pursuing the worldview of sensitivity. Let's keep on going in verse 4. And Paul here says, everyone, okay, not some people, everyone. I love when he does that. You don't get excluded no matter who you are in the room. Everyone should look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. Now you see, this is kind of building on the previous verse. Paul takes humility, which humility is more of a mindset. It's more of a heart change. And he says, I'm going to take that rewiring of you, and now you need to act on it. Now you not need to just see people as important, but you actually need to have the rubber meet the road. Now you got to actually act out. And this is something sometimes we get so in our busy culture that we don't look out for the interests of others because we're so preoccupied with what we have in our own life. I have my own problems I need to figure out. I got to get here. I got to get to the grocery store. I have a crying kid at home. I got to do this. I got to do that. And we can neglect, and we can pass by, and we can miss both those close to us and even those strangers in our lives that need the help, that needed an interest taken in them, just like God took an interest in us. And here again, as we read this, think of it. I love that Paul doesn't say you should neglect your own interest. He's saying you should look out for your interests, your own, but not only for your interests, but others as well. And he doesn't do a condition on this. He doesn't say if they have their stuff together, then help them. But he just says start loving and helping those around you. Now here's what I love as we kind of come and start to wrap up this passage and close out with the rest of this in verse 2. What I just love about all this passage overall is that Paul, in telling us to stay united, he affirms what we talk about here at Cross Church all the time. He says pursue the same mindset, of think the same thing. That's why we talk about our mission all the time. That's why we say as soon as you walk through the door, here's what we're about. We're about making Jesus known. That is what is most important to us over anything else, is we want to tell people about who this guy Jesus is and that he is the God of our lives. But then he goes on and he says, have a life of humility. That we also talk about this in our vision, that it doesn't end here. That Cross Church is just part of a greater kingdom. That our vision is that we start more churches, that we celebrate more churches, that we lock arms with brothers and sisters across our state and across our world in spreading that message even more. And then lastly, this worldview of sensitivity. We say here all the time that our hearts, the way we show people and the way we tell people that Jesus is this great God is that we care about our world around us. You see, here's how we stay united as a church. We stay focused on what really matters. And in a crazy year like 2020, if you want to stay united as a church family, united as followers of Jesus, we need to simply stay focused on what greater things God has called us to. And here's the deal. Maybe you hear all that and you're like, that's great. That's awesome. I'll try to apply that. But I'll be honest with you, I'm selfish, so I don't know how good I could be at being humble. I'll be honest with you, I'm busy, so I don't know if I can look out for the other interests. Like, that all sounds great in theory, but how can I actually do that? How can I do that when I just have so much going on in my life? Well, we can do it because our God did it first. We're going to close out today and read Philippians 2, 5 through 11. And I like how Paul tells them, first he starts at, this is what you need to do. This is how you stay united. But then he's going to say, here's why we can stay united. Because the power of our God who has already done this for us. Chapter 2, starting in verse 5, here's what he says. He says, adopt the same attitude as that of Christ Jesus. And listen to the description. This is called, some refer to this as a Christ hymn, of the great hymn of Christ, of who he is by his nature. It says this, who existing in the form of God, this is Jesus Christ, he did not consider equality with God as something to be exploited. He knew he was God. He knew that was there, but he didn't exploit that. Instead, it said he emptied himself by assuming the form of a servant, taking on the likeness of humanity. Jesus came down to us to become a man. And when he had come as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to the point of death, even to death on a cross. You see, when Jesus got arrested, when Jesus got nailed to a cross, he could have been like, all right, I'm out. This is too much. I've endured this. I am innocent. I don't have to take on the sins of the people of humanity who really deserves this. Angel armies come rescue me. I'm out of this. Instead, he forsaked that. He humbled himself to a death he didn't deserve that we did. Verse 9, it says, for this reason. God highly exalted him. He gave him the name above every name. That is above every name, so that at the name of Jesus, every knee will bow in heaven and on earth and under the earth. And every tongue will confess that Jesus Christ is Lord, to the glory of God the Father. Here's the bottom line I want you to leave with today. Because he cares, we care. We care about staying united as a church because he cared for us. We care for staying united for a bigger purpose and reaching our community because he cares for us. And maybe your life's not where it needs to be yet. Maybe your heart hasn't been transformed fully to what you need to be, and it's a daily struggle of getting closer to him. But because of what Jesus Christ did for us, when he died and raised again, we have the power to look at the struggles of our world and the struggle that in front of us and say we can stay united in the power of Jesus Christ. And here's what's so amazing about that. That infectious heart and attitude will transform our worlds. And in just a minute, we're going to pray. And if you are a follower of Jesus, if you are a Christian, if you consider this even your church family, then I want to encourage you to go through this sermon and this passage and ask, where does God need to take a bigger part of my heart? Where does God need to transform me to aligning so that I'm striving for unity in my life rather than division with those around me? And maybe that's not you. Maybe you don't know this Jesus. Maybe you don't know who this God is and you've never taken that step for the first time. Well, in just a minute, I'm going to lead you in a prayer. And if today you want to say enough is enough, I've tried this on my own. I've followed the world. I've hitched to a donkey. I've hitched to an elephant, and they both lead to destruction. If I'm trying to give up and go towards this God, if that's you today, then we're going to show you what the start of this journey looks like. Man, I hope today that you don't just gather here together, but that you can be inspired to be united by a bigger purpose. Let's pray.